40,000 years ago, in a cave overlooking the Mediterranean, the last of an entire species took a final breath. Not the last of a small tribe, the last of a species that had thrived on this planet for over 300,000 years, longer than modern humans have existed. And then, in what amounts to a geological blink, they were simply gone. This is the story of the Neanderthals, and honestly, it's stranger, sadder, and more personal than almost anyone realizes. Let's start with who they actually were, because the popular image is almost entirely wrong. They had brains slightly larger than modern humans on average. They made sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, wore clothing sewn from animal hides, and buried their dead, sometimes with flowers placed in the grave. A detail archaeologists discovered at a site called Shanidar Cave in Iraq that shook the entire field. They cared for injured members of their group who couldn't hunt or walk unaided, meaning someone else fed them for years. This wasn't a primitive afterthought species. This was a successful, intelligent branch of humanity that dominated Europe and Western Asia, for longer than our own species has been drawing cave paintings. So what happened? For decades, the leading theory was climate. Neanderthals evolved specifically for the harsh, cold environment of Ice Age Europe. Their bodies were built like tanks, short and stocky, built to conserve heat, with massive rib cages housing larger lungs and a nose specially shaped to warm frigid air before it hit their lungs. They were, in almost every physical sense, better adapted to the cold than we were. But around 50,000 years ago, Europe's climate began swinging violently, rapid warming and cooling cycles called Dansgaard-Oeschger events, sometimes flipping average temperatures by 10 degrees Celsius within a single human lifetime. Climate scientists studying ice cores from Greenland have documented these swings in extraordinary detail, and the instability would have devastated the large game herds Neanderthals depended on for survival. A species finely tuned for one specific brutal climate suddenly found the rules changing faster than evolution could keep up. But climate alone doesn't explain the timing, because right around the same window, something else arrived in Neanderthal territory: us. Modern humans began migrating into Europe roughly 45,000 years ago, and the archaeological record shows an uncomfortable overlap of several thousand years where both species lived across the same landscape, sometimes remarkably close together. This is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because we now know something that would have seemed like science fiction just 20 years ago. In 2010, the Neanderthal genome was sequenced for the first time, an extraordinary technical achievement led by geneticist Svante Pääbo, work that would later win him the Nobel Prize. And the results were staggering. Modern humans outside Africa carry roughly 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. We didn't just encounter them, we interbred with them repeatedly across multiple separate occasions. Think about what that actually means. Every time you see a photo of a Neanderthal skull in a museum, displayed like some extinct alien relative, remember that a small fragment of that exact genome is very possibly sitting inside your own cells right now, quietly influencing things like your immune system, your skin's response to sunlight, and even, according to some studies, your risk for certain conditions like depression or blood clotting disorders. They didn't vanish completely. They dissolved into us. So why, if we were interbreeding, did Neanderthals as a distinct population disappear? Researchers point to several factors stacking together rather than one single cause. Modern humans arrived with larger social networks. Some studies suggest groups 2 to 3 times bigger than typical Neanderthal bands, which meant more genetic diversity, more shared knowledge, and a larger buffer against sudden population crashes. Modern humans also brought more sophisticated projectile weapons, spear throwers, and eventually bows, allowing them to hunt from a distance. while Neanderthal hunting technique appears to have relied more heavily on close-range thrusting spears, a method that put hunters at far greater risk of injury with every single hunt. Skeletal analysis of Neanderthal remains shows injury patterns strikingly similar to modern rodeo athletes, repeated trauma from getting dangerously close to large, powerful animals. There's also the demographic math, and it's brutal in its simplicity. Genetic studies suggest Neanderthal populations across their entire range in Europe and Asia may have numbered only in the tens of thousands at any given time. An alarmingly small and fragmented population to begin with. Add climate chaos disrupting food supplies, competition for the same prey animals and territory, and a numerically larger, more socially connected modern human population expanding into the same shrinking resource base, and you don't need a single dramatic extinction event. You just need centuries of modern humans slightly outcompeting, slightly out-surviving, and gradually absorbing Neanderthal populations through interbreeding until the distinct lineage simply thinned out of existence. The very last confirmed Neanderthal populations held out in isolated pockets, including sites in Gibraltar at the southern tip of Spain, a natural dead end where a shrinking population had nowhere left to retreat. Genetic and archaeological dating places the final populations at roughly 40,000 years ago, though the exact end date remains a subject of active scientific debate, with new discoveries occasionally pushing that number in either direction. Here's what should genuinely stop you. Neanderthals weren't erased by some single dramatic catastrophe. No meteor, no plague, no war of annihilation that historians can point to and say, "Here, this is what killed them." They faded, gradually, absorbed and outcompeted across thousands of years until the last isolated group simply couldn't sustain themselves anymore. And yet, in the deepest possible sense, they never actually went extinct at all. They live on quite literally in the DNA of billions of people alive today, an entire vanished species hiding in plain sight inside every one of us who isn't of purely African descent. The Neanderthals didn't lose to us. In a strange and haunting way, they simply became part of us. An ancient relative whose face you'll never see, whose voice you'll never hear, but whose genes are right now quietly shaping who you are. So, does it change how you think about that Neanderthal skull in the museum, knowing part of it might already be inside you? Subscribe, because next time we're diving into the impossible ocean crossing that got humans to Australia 50,000 years ago. See you then.